in the matter world reality. And the much lighter magnesium zinc will show as shades of dark gray. So the thin lines on this that are white are actually the black bismuth, and the magnesium zinc are all of those layers of the gray. Here is a tighter close-up. When you look at those lines, think that the gray is about the size of a hair on your head, and that the white are twice the diameter of a red blood cell. We're in the world of nanotechnology. One scientist thought that the waviness might be a fractal wave pattern calculated in the layered material's construction on purpose, perhaps to better resonate with a specific frequency, and there was much discussion about magnetic fields. If you had a dynamic field or a static field, and you had metal like this that was made because bismuth is resistant to magnetic fields, could there be an interaction specifically built into these layers to deal with magnetic field lines? Or the waviness might be the result of heat absorbed in the metal's production or function, which was a mystery and unknown. In summary, the metal fragments, allegedly from the central underside of a wedge-shaped spacecraft found in New Mexico, have about 26 alternating layers. The bismuth layers, 1 to 4 microns, magnesium zinc, 100 to 200 microns, and one exotic metals manufacturer that I went to in New Jersey back in 1996, and I just gave him the university professor's specs. I said, I have the graphs, I have the work to back this up. And this man said, quote, "No one laminates bismuth and magnesium, it cannot be done," close quote. And he was adamant that nobody on Earth could possibly put bismuth and magnesium together. It would delaminate, it would come apart, and he knew of no one who did that. So what is bismuth? Here is a picture of a crystal. Its atomic number on the periodic table of elements is 83, right next to lead is 82. So bismuth is heavier than lead. Bismuth is frequently found in ores of tin, lead, copper, and cobalt. Bismuth is not attacked at all by hydrochloric acid, and only slightly by hot sulfuric acid. But the element is rapidly dissolved by either dilute or concentrated nitric acid. The Guide to Uncommon Metals says, quote, "Bismuth is one of the few metals that expands when cooled, like water does when it turns to ice, and that makes bismuth valuable for detailed metal castings. Bismuth also has a low melting point, but its thermal conductivity is lower than that of perhaps every other metal, with the exception of mercury, and its electrical resistance is high. It is used as a coolant in modern nuclear power reactors. Bismuth is the most diamagnetic of the elements, meaning it resists penetration by magnetic fields more strongly than any other element. Magnetic field lines tend to be displaced around bismuth rather than passing through it. Bismuth also has the greatest Hall effect, and that means if a voltage is placed on bismuth while the metal is in a magnetic field, a current flow will be induced that is 90 degrees angled to the voltage. Bismuth is an efficient absorber of infrared energy, and researchers are experimenting with bismuth coatings that will convert heat to electricity. Bismuth is also added to metal mixtures in superconducting research. On July 5th, 1996, a fourth and final letter from the South Carolina source added a few more comments about the bismuth-magnesium. Quote, "Okay, regarding the second set of samples dispatched," and he's reading from his grandfather's diary, quote, "sample extraction radiated light for a full 3 hours. originally located on the central underside of wedge-shaped disk, speculate some type of shielding, to enable craft and crew to survive accelerated entry into the atmosphere. When craft was experiencing uncontrolled descent, pile of blackened ash was analyzed, and the ash was confirmed of the same elements of the layering. Ash consisted of fibrous dust and residue. Ash and all debris swept into bagging, bags placed in tag boxes, boxes placed into metal footlockers. The initial examination was off-site, conducted at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. Secondary examinations at Los Alamos facility. Footlockers subsequently airlifted by courier to Wright Field, Ohio, close quote. In addition to the unfamiliar combination of bismuth and magnesium zinc, there were questions about the isotopic ratios in the magnesium. Isotope refers to the number of protons and neutrons in the nucleus of each atom. For example, magnesium on Earth is made up of about 80% magnesium-24. That means there are 12 protons and 12 neutrons at the center of each magnesium-24 atom. The other 20% is equally divided between magnesium-25, which has one additional neutron compared to magnesium-24, and magnesium-26, which has two additional neutrons compared to magnesium-24. If the layered metal were truly extraterrestrial in origin, some wondered if anomalies might be detected in those ratios or percentages of isotopes. One such anomaly had been reported in 1957 in the famous Ubatuba, Sao Paulo, Brazil case. And that was September 14th, 1957. Eyewitnesses on a beach saw this flying disc explode. There were thousands of fiery fragments that fell to the beach. And then when the metal was picked up and tested, it was 6.7% heavier than ordinary pure magnesium. It was decided it was 100% pure magnesium, and that did not exist on Earth. The Ubatuba has always been considered one of the hard physical science reported, and what happens? It disappeared. I learned that an ion microprobe which could analyze magnesium isotopes was newly installed at the Carnegie Institution of Washington, D.C. After discussions with Dr. Eric Oury in the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism, who agreed to analyze the layered bismuth and magnesium metal, I drove to Washington, D.C. on July 20th, 1996. With a cut and polished slice of this layered material that he put into this cage to put it inside of the big ion microprobe, and he found that it had 11% more magnesium-26 than compared to baseline Earth magnesium. One anomaly was, here is the bismuth-magnesium metal average for in a pure magnesium metal versus the one that we are looking at. It had 11% more magnesium-26 and was not outside of terrestrial magnesium. But the other important thing is that he found that the bismuth-magnesium sample gave count rates of positive magnesium ions, which were enhanced 60 times more than in pure magnesium standard. And I even asked him there in the lab. People talk about UFOs as putting out clouds. And people say, what is this? What are these clouds? Well, maybe they are designed, and this is part of the technology, to under whatever is the provocative, what is provoking the positive ions. That might have something to do with all of the ionization that is associated with so many UFO craft. I kept reporting the research findings on Dreamland and sometimes on Coast to Coast with Art And I asked if anyone listening had information about the construction or function of the layered bismuth magnesium. And I also contacted a dozen scientists. I worked with Hal Puthoff. I worked with a whole range of people. And nobody could come up with what it could do, what it could function, and let alone, a lot of people said, well, why don't we try to make this in a lab? To date, no one has. And one of the people who came to me after a coast to coast was a man named Travis Taylor. He worked at Redstone Army Arsenal. His boss was the Defense Intelligence Agency. He called me up and he said, I really would like to help you with a testing of this material in electrostatic fields. And he said, I asked before I called you, and the DIA said to me, yes, you can work with Linda Moulton Howe as long as every single thing that you find, you report to us first. It didn't matter to me. It's fine. The government can have any knowledge that I find in anything I'm doing. I just wish it were a two-way street. Now, I asked Travis if the first thing he would do, and remember, he's working at Redstone Army Arsenal. He has access to all kinds of technical, he's a physicist. And I asked him if he would do a literature search in scientific and military, especially military channels, and see if he could find any references to bismuth and magnesium layered in any micron layers. About 2 months later, this is what he sent me. Linda, I have basically exhausted every resource that I've ever tried to use in the past from about 1940 to now. I have found no reference, even in government research, for bismuth-magnesium layers. This material didn't just make itself. It had to come from somewhere. And that's one of the things about it that excites me. Somebody had to build it, and no one has reported building it. It's a very high-tech piece of material. So if they didn't report it, why did they build it? That's what we do in science. We do some research and then we tell everyone about it. And nobody has told anyone about this material. And then he tried 500,000 volts produced by a Van de Graaff generator with the bismuth magnesium on a plastic insulator. And the layered metal at one point, I was there, moved sideways. It started moving like this on top of this cap. And I had been given some information that if we added a 7 hertz radio frequency in an electrostatic field of 1 million, we wanted to get up to 1 million volts, and he couldn't on this particular experiment. But that if we had 1 million volts and we added a 7 hertz radio frequency, it would turn into a lifting body. So we're trying. And the piece that's moving like this suddenly jumped up and fell on the floor. Then he built a Van de Graaff generator big enough to produce 1.2 million volts. And he used for insulation a thin piece of paper that was suspended above the generator. And the layered bismuth magnesium metal and the control were placed on the paper. And to his surprise, the bismuth magnesium tended again to move sideways in the electrostatic field, while the control did not. When a tunable 1 to 20 megahertz radio signal was added in this experiment with a higher electrostatic field, the bismuth magnesium seemed to have a more energetic reaction backing away. It went the opposite direction of the radio frequency signal. Travis wondered if there might be a connection to the nuclear magnetic resonance frequency of bismuth, which is, interestingly enough, about 7 megahertz, the same as the stimulating radio frequency signal he was using then. Nuclear magnetic resonance occurs at the subatomic level under certain conditions when a substance is placed in an external static magnetic field. So he arranged for me to have contact with somebody he worked for from the Redstone Arsenal with the DIA. And it was a Defense Department contractor in California. I was not to give their name or talk about who they were or where they were. And the agreement was that I'd send them a piece for a certain period of time, and they were going to test it in dynamic magnetic fields as well as different steps of static, because the DoD subcontractor literally told me on the phone, we right now are researching materials that can have resonance with certain magnetic frequencies because we are trying to find lifting bodies. He said those words. And remember, that was the time when Podkletnov in Russia made all of that news about having smoke or particles rise, and there was an argument about whether it was truly a lifting body neutralizing gravity or some other effect. Now, Colonel Corso told me that he had not heard ever of any layered bismuth and magnesium, but he described his understanding of one extraterrestrial spacecraft propulsion this way, quote, "The craft was able to displace gravity through the propagation of magnetic waves controlled by shifting the magnetic poles around the craft so as to control or vector not a propulsion system, but the repulsion force of like charges." Now, whatever the layered bismuth and magnesium zinc's function might be, it remains a mystery to this day. The information from the South Carolina source could be a controlled government release into public consciousness without the political commitment of official sanction. If government insiders do know about layered bismuth magnesium and the extraterrestrial wedge-shaped craft that it came from, their silence is consistent with a policy of cover-up since at least the early 1940s and the UFO crashes in and around Roswell and in the state of New Mexico and beyond. At least one political representative knows about New Mexico UFOs and our government's strict policy of lies and silence about the alien presence on Earth. I just dropped my laser pointer, so I'm not going to try to look for it. Landing Zone 1 is between Corona and New Mexico. Landing Zone 2 is the one down below Oscura Peak near the Trinity site. Landing Zone 3 is on the Mescalero Indian Reservation. And Andy Kistner, representative in Colorado, was also privy to the same kind of information, and he had a guy who was an operative in the Naval Research Lab, which has been out at White Sands ever since Project Paperclip, when the German scientists were trying to get the rocket program going. Representative Kistner learned from a Naval Research Lab contact at White Sands, and he was operating as a official a politician in Colorado, or in New Mexico. Representative Kistner learned from a Naval Research Lab contact at White Sands that in the 1940s to the early 1950s, that there was an American government policy to shoot down unidentified aerial discs. But the discs retaliated. Many of our pilots died, which forced an end to our shoot-down policy. Andy Kistner said he learned that President Harry S. Truman ordered a policy of denial in the interests of national security about all UFO crash retrievals, a classified executive order that allegedly is still in force to this day. And to underscore the reality of the extraterrestrial presence and government knowledge about it, I would like to share excerpts from a videotape interview that I produced on April 24th, 2006, with one of the few military sources in my career who has been willing to talk on the record with his real name about extraterrestrial biological entities. His name is Thomas Coleman Shepard. He served in the United States Navy from September 1975 until his retirement 20 years later in 1995 as an E-7 Chief Petty Officer, Chief Yeoman. Tom is now 63 years old and wants to be on the record about his extraterrestrial knowledge because he told me, quote, "I can't believe our government is still keeping it a secret," close quote. Tom strongly feels that the public should be told the truth. Here is Thomas Coleman Shepard's Naval History of Assignments from March 26, 1976 to 1978 with the Pacific Amphibious Group 1 at White Beach in Okinawa, Japan. Now we're going back 41 years to Thanksgiving night in 1976. Tom was stationed at White Beach Naval Base in Okinawa, and at the time he was a seaman apprentice to the staff of the Commander Amphibious Group 1. Most of his work was clerical. That Thanksgiving night, he was in the administration building with two other men, Robert Turman and Craig Howard. Howard was mechanically gifted and liked to prove he could get into any sensitive area that were off limits. And that Thanksgiving night, years ago, when no one was around on that holiday, Craig Howard had gotten into a vault that contained classified material and was yelling for Turman to join him. Tom Shepard watched as Turman ran into the administration office that contained the vault. Shepard wondered what Howard had found that was so urgent. Listen now as retired Navy Chief Yeoman Tom Shepard tells what happened.
And I saw Howard and Topin go into the vault. And they were in there for about 5 minutes. And Howard comes out first, and Topin follows. And Topin's kind of got tears at his eyes, and he said that it's true. Well, this really caught my attention, so I was really astounded to hear, this kind of reaction from him. So then Howard, he calls me over and he says, "Come on in." So I go in there, right, and it's a vault, and it's a small room, and it's got the filing cabinets and the safes. And it's got a table right there in the middle of the vault. The table's about the size of this, but square and taller. And on that table, he had this file laid out. And this file was, it was like all spread out on the table here, okay? And it had photographs and documents and the covers and everything. And he said, "This is what it's all about," and he handed me one of the photographs. And I looked at it, and I had no idea what I was looking at. It was an old black and white photograph. It had a old truck in it, and down on the ground, and you could tell they were out in the desert, was some sort of a creature. What looked like, what I would call now an alien creature. I had no idea what I was looking at back then, so I said to Howard, "Well, what am I looking at here?" He goes, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "I don't know." He says, "It's an alien creature from outer space, you big dummy." And I go, "No, it is not." And he goes, "You're looking right at one of these, and you still can't believe it? Won't believe it?" That's incredible. So I looked at that photograph, and I looked at another photograph that had them laid out on a skid, and looked at two other photographs, and they had a very dark black background, and one of them was a headshot, and the other photograph was of it, an elongated shot on a type of gurney. And I looked at the documents, and there was a lot of red ink, top secret. One of the words was magic, and magic was spelt with a J. And I even made a comment to Howard. I said, "Look at here, they can't even spell magic right. They spelled it with a J." It just looked like an old file, but the gauge of the year would have to be from the 30s or the 40s, just based on the truck. The aliens sort of looked like that one down in the Roswell Museum, but different too. Because it's black and white, you couldn't really get a lot of tone with the kind of skin it had. But if I had to describe it at all, it would have been like snake skin in sort of way.
Can you explain that further?
They had a whitish kind of appearance, but you could tell it had some color to it. And if I had to describe it as matches any other type of animal that I know of, it would have been like that of a white snake, say.
And Could you discern scales?
Not really, no. No, but you could tell that they just looked like